Has this summer felt a little strange to you? It has to me. Now, normally by this time in summer, I'd be taking time every once in a while on the weekends to get together with some friends. We always play music and we bring food. We also get together for 4th of July, maybe go to some fireworks or have a picnic. Usually, we find ourselves doing things with lots of other people, at least I do. Now, I've heard from some of you that going to the beach is weird because when you're sitting at your towel, you don't have to worry about wearing a mask, but when you walk around, you've got to put one on. And that's always just, you're covered in suntan lotion, maybe some sand. That's just strange. I've heard from some of you, you don't even want to attempt to go to the movie theater, which is always a great way to cool off because it's usually frigid and you have to wear a sweater. And some of you have told me you don't even want to risk going out to eat because it's just not worth it. So some of you are doing family gatherings. If you're a couple, you're obviously okay together, but maybe your extended family wants to come, but you have got to stay distant and you've got to wear masks. But even if we're doing some things together, we don't feel completely at ease. We're not really free to just be together because we have these different constraints and we have to do social distancing and protect ourselves. And so we keep hoping for the day when we can go about our lives in freedom without checking COVID updates on a daily basis, which is what I do all the time. And the weight of it is all even greater when we see the headlines keep talking about the surge of the COVID virus in the Southwest, in the West, in the South and in the West, and of course in some countries in Latin America, it's really getting off the charts. And then there's obviously the disturbing videos of police violence against Black and brown Americans, and then we have violence against protesters who are protesting against violence. And there are millions of Americans out of work, and we're uncertain about what the coming months are going to look like. And especially when we have a kind of contentious and vitally important presidential election that's coming up this fall. So given all this, it's not surprising that a recent survey of Americans on an AP poll finds that Americans are more unhappy now than they were 50 years ago. Anytime in the last 50 years, I should say. So that's saying something. And so that burden, it seems pretty great, especially when we consider that we're supposed to be celebrating our country's independence from English rule. Now, the 4th of July signifies much, much more than parades and picnics and fireworks, of course. It commemorates that independence was won by the courage and the sacrifice and the faith of those who believed that the country they were beginning should be united under God with liberty and justice for all. And so that should tell us something as we think about our scriptures for today. Now, you might be thinking, how can the marriage of Rebekah and Isaac relate to this? And what it seems like is that God is playing matchmaker for Rebekah and Isaac. But doesn't it represent more than that? Well, Diane Roth thinks so. She wrote, "What if all God does every day is make matches? What if, that is, the only way God transforms the world is by bringing people together? Since creation, God has been arranging meetings, bringing people together, not just so that they will have a nice life, but for larger and probably more mysterious purposes, because the people don't always know what's going to happen next. So our loves are holy, and they're a holy product of a loving God. Think about it. One of the dearest offers of a relationship comes to us from God in God's Son. Jesus' great love for all of God's people led him to build connections, to also break down barriers where people weren't allowed to cross and associate with one another. And most of all, Jesus always told the plain truth. And unfortunately, it caused him to make enemies. Those are not always good relationships. But through everything, Jesus always invites us into a relationship with him. And like the most meaningful and deep relationships, it means that we may have to make the occasional sacrifices. That's what he was once talking about in the scriptures that we heard from about 2 or 3 weeks ago, when Jesus talked about if we stand by him and with him, if we stand on God's side, we might make enemies ourselves. And some of those enemies or some of those hard relationships to break might be with family members. But Jesus equips us for such sacrifices and for such times as these that we face. When the burden of life is too heavy, we need to sit with him. We need to talk with him, and that's kind of what we're doing today. We make time for a peaceful moment so that we can talk to Jesus, so that we can be in his presence, in God's presence, and to also learn from him. His words, Jesus' actions, they all spoke louder than words. And they're always there for us to turn to right here in this big book. Now, Jesus in our text says, my yoke is easy. And his yoke, by the way, means teachings. So his yoke is easy, and his burden that he says, if it's a burden to call him friend and teacher, it's very light when it's compared to trying to be independent and doing everything on our own and trying to figure out everything on our own, and as so much of society thinks is wonderful, is that when we are self-sufficient. So walking with Jesus, bearing his yoke, living by his teachings is easier because he bears the burden with us. Now, the life and love that Rebecca and Isaac shared also was holy because they both trusted in God for the plans for their future and for the future of Israel. And Jesus' life and love for all people was holy because God wanted the best relationship, friendship, for us with Jesus. And so the lives of and the loves of those who dreamed of a free country with life and liberty for all, they were holy lives and holy loves because their cause was deeply rooted in their faith in a higher power. And that power was based in a love for God, a love for neighbor, and a love for self. So I think God is about making matches in our lives. We always talk about we never know when that stranger we meet is going to be maybe the most important connection we might make. We never know when we offer a stranger a cup of cold water, we might be meeting Jesus, or we might simply be making a connection we may never have made. But it's a wonderful way to think about our lives, that God makes matches in our lives. God is always bringing us, either us into contact with others or others into contact with us. And we find that through a shared faith and through a shared exploration of what that faith means for us in how we act in the world and how we go out into the world, then we end up building a stronger world. We just never know how those things might change our lives and make others' lives better. So today I think we have a little bit to think about relationships, But when we come to the table that is set with grace and mercy for all, I also invite us to think about the freedoms that we enjoy in our imperfect society. Consider the matches that God has brought to you that's maybe made your faith grow stronger or increased your compassion for others, and most certainly made your life richer because that person or those people are in our lives. And when we come to this table, let us think also about those, the men and women that we don't always hear about, who help build the structure and the foundation for this country that was based on their faith. What they began, we continue. And because of that, we are free to believe and to act even when it's hard, because God bears our burdens, gives us instruction, and in these days when it's most needed, God gives us rest. It's just a reminder that we can't do it all alone, and nor should we have to. Amen.